very grateful to Lynn-Ann and Keith and Jay for inviting me to speak with you. So it's a great crowd. We're very aligned with what everybody's doing here. So it's a real pleasure. But let me just set a little bit of context for the story I'm going to share. It's about Ashtabula, Ohio, which if you were in the session with Mariel Conception yesterday, you heard a little bit about that story. But I want to ground it in reality. There's a funeral director there named Mike Choop that he's 52 years old. And what he's found is that he's basically a full quarter of the people that he is involved in, kind of the final stage, on Earth is they're younger than him. And this is largely because of opioids. And that's another one of the unique facets of our US healthcare system. That's completely a self-inflicted wound. That is not something you see in other countries. And in fact, in Ohio, they've had more people die from opioid overdoses than all of the US had died during the Vietnam War. That's the kind of devastation that it's wrought. But then to kind of bring it back a little closer to home, I'm going to draw a little analogy closer to home here, is a century ago, there was a market failure. And right here, Oklahoma City, fully powered up with electricity. But not far from here, 96% of the rural residents did not have power. And the private utility companies, they claimed that serving rural communities, wasn't economically viable. And, they were kind of right through their profit maximizing lens, but profoundly wrong about what was possible. And ultimately, we have rural electric cooperatives that are powering the majority of the landmass of this country. It was actually a case study yesterday that I sat in and it was great. And cooperatives brought that power to communities. And in a way, we're bringing power to communities through what we're all doing here. And, because of the system is a real failure in many ways. And, today's health insurance is kind of like the health insurance companies, just like the old companies, private utility companies a century ago, are just kind of cherry picking profitable segments and with no regard to actually what makes sense for their community. But there is hope, and I'm going to focus most of my talk on that even in these challenging times, people are really like people here. They're not making excuses. There's a lot of excuse making in our industry, and that's one of the things I love about this community is it just gets on with it and solves problems. But to ground things in reality in Ashtabula, they, in the Midwest, like much of the Midwest, it was a real strong manufacturing base. And, for those of us old enough to remember, back in the day, like in the 90s, there were headlines, GM spends more on healthcare than steel, and every car has got a $2,000 premium, because of healthcare. And rather than address the root cause of that, they just punted and just moved the jobs out of there and left communities like Ashtabula devastated. And then if you look at what's actually happening in terms of the debt, over 100 million Americans are in debt to the healthcare system. That means in Ashtabula County, there are about 100,000 people. There's over 30,000 people. When you have that level of debt, coming out of the tech world, we talk about things in terms of bugs and features. Well, that's not a bug in the system. That's a feature of our system. To produce 100 million Americans in debt to the healthcare system today is really, in a weird way, a remarkable achievement. And some of the facets of this market failure that I hear about from clinicians, again, not news to most of you, there's misaligned incentives. And so the things that are exactly opposite of what we want to happen are what we reward, and we put barriers in front of things that are very low cost, and then it's all you can eat buffet, for folks to profiteer like PBMs. For the brokers and advisors in the room, if you operate in the traditional model, there's deep conflicts of interest. where the worse job you do for your clients, the more money you make. That's not a way to run the system. And for employers, they really have been trained to just believe the best you can hope for is just a less sucky increase if you have somebody that, will kind of negotiate on the edges. But there's no reason for that to be the case. And so there's Bryce Heinbaugh is one of these advisors who was very frustrated. He was prepared to leave the industry. Some of you heard him speak last year, and he was all new to this around the time we were launching Health Rosetta. But I think it's really interesting to see in quite a short amount of time how big of an impact an individual could have on their broader community. He stepped in, he was learning this stuff from scratch in 2018, 2019, started with a single employer, only 38 employees. This wasn't Walmart, but cut his teeth, learned it, and as you see, he just stepped through a lot of the things you're hearing about throughout the event. Learned how to do direct contracts with the healthcare organizations. It was a medical desert there in Ashtabula, less than 30% per capita docs, and so there were no DPC docs, but he got a doc to come out of retirement for a while, and then he got a doc that was 45 minutes away in the Cleveland area. He said, hey, if I get you 400 patients, would you come up a couple days a week? We've got a room in the school that we can, you can set up your clinic. Heck yeah. So step by step, he just solved it, and it went from, we measure things in employee lives, and year one, 38 lives. Next year, 500, some more employers. And the next year, 1,300. That was actually 2020, kind of a weird year, obviously. And then it went to over 3,000, and now it's over 5,000. And it would probably be even higher if his work hadn't been noticed by so many people. So he's doing a lot of work nationally, doing some really interesting work with some sharing ministry, some Catholic dioceses, mega church, evangelical mega church. So they're employers too, and they have memberships. So they've done some amazing work. There's a lot more to that story, but those are just a few of the high points. And so we have a 5-step process that we take people through. My last book was called Relocalizing Health. That's a big part of our themes of what we're doing. And it spells out this acrostic, spells local. And the first one is overwhelmingly the biggest obstacle that we find. And it's just a mindset shift. Many people, in fact, probably most Americans think solving healthcare is like trying to solve Middle East peace. Like they'd like that solved, seems maybe hopeless and out of their control. And if you believe that, you're right. If you also don't believe it, you're also right. And that's the big difference. Once you do that, then the steps that we take people through, and actually our biggest investment in our headcount and our investment has been on this kind of boring underpinning stuff, this optimized plan infrastructure. These are who you're working with, the advisor, the TPAs, the contracts. We've spent 7 figures on rewriting all of the legal documents that underpin health plans. They're essentially the operating system of healthcare. That's what we learned, is every dysfunction that I've ever heard in healthcare, if you unpack it and get to the root cause, none of it's an accident. It's all written in those contracts. Every abuse that's made possible, everything that makes clinicians' lives miserable, it's all in there. And you can make those suck less, but ultimately you have to rewrite them. And so we did that, and then we're in the process of open sourcing our work, because we essentially battle test that with a few hundred employers that we work with directly in tandem with Health Rosetta advisors. After that battle testing, we make it available to all the Health Rosetta advisors and their 10, 15,000 employers, and then we open source it. So it's freely available. The first pieces are already out there. We launched that at Rosetta Fest, and we have a bunch more in the works, plus technology. So if we want to pull off this audacious goal of developing an entirely new supply chain, which is obviously has to be done, we have to open source it. And so we're a public benefit corporation, Health Rosetta, but then we set up a nonprofit called Nautilus Health Institute, where that resides. And there's about $4 million of technology development and contract and stuff expertise that we have made fully available for free to anybody, so that the entire supply chain can emerge out of that. And so then the third step is kind of the weird sort of good news, is the shenanigans are so extreme in the PBM arena that there's incredible amount of low-hanging fruit. There's some good people in the pharmacy supply chain here. We work with a number of them. It's very difficult to get value out of the big three that have 80–90% of the market. But that's very low-hanging fruit, whether you're an employer with 10 people like us on the plan, or you're a 200,000 plus union. You can get incredible savings there. You're probably going to be able to save 30–50% of the pharmacy component, which is probably going to be 5–10% of overall spend. And it's a nice thing that then can, if you're more conservative, as some employers are, of like, hey, I want to just see if I can get the savings. Well, some do that, and then they invest it in primary care. We know that there's no well-functioning healthcare system in the world not built on proper primary care. So let's get after it. We're rebuilding it. And there's incredible stuff going on in that primary care area. I actually I think exactly a dozen years ago, I published through the California Healthcare Foundation the seminal paper on direct primary care. And I went back and looked at that and was like, wow, we've come a long ways. Still plenty of ways to go, but we've come a long, long ways. So it's a testament to many people here that are making that happen. And then the final step is the one where there is the biggest payoff. And what's notable about the first 4 steps is, particularly for employers who are a little, careful and conservative, afraid of change, the first 4 steps are either invisible to the member or clearly a positive, like adding direct primary care. And so you can do things that basically do little to change things for the employee experience until you add great primary care. And then with the direct contracting and reference-based pricing, these different tools, if it's in the hands of a professional that's done it before, it's the biggest benefit and the most tangible for the member. But there are definitely plenty of examples of people like, that's the magic solution, I'm going to do that, and don't have the right sort of thought process. Actually, my last book, Relocalizing Health, the biggest chapter in that book was on change management, because you could have the best design plan in the world, the best contracts, the best docs, the whole thing. If you don't roll that out smartly, it will still blow up. And so we're very thoughtful about those things. And if you're working with the right folks, they'll take you through that. And then that's when the word of mouth really spreads. And even within that, you can ladder up, like, labs suddenly free, imaging suddenly free, and, some surgeries, right? And those things drive the word of mouth within an employer, and then more and more success as you get along. So to see just at a high level what it's like if you're an employee in Ashtabula, there's no reason to have cost sharing for things that are work and are affordable. And so unlimited direct primary care, nurse navigators who are incredibly valuable. And, back to the lack of excuse making, the picture there is with Casey Billington, who leads the Concierge Nurse Navigator. This is a lumber mill in West Virginia. Not only is it a medical desert, it's a food desert. The closest grocery store is an hour away. The only food in town is like a Dollar General. This is not an easy place, but there's ways even in those situations to get direct primary care. Maybe they come down, kind of meet everybody, and then come down once a week, once every 2 weeks, right? Depends on how many people and what the economics are. But there's ways, once you've established that relationship, particularly in primary care, I consistently hear from docs, yeah, 2/3 of the time, I don't need to see you in person and lay hands on you. In fee-for-service, we force you to come in because that's the only way we get paid. But once you remove that barrier, then you can start to serve those areas quite effectively. And they've done that. And the other piece that's really been great there is the community pharmacists. Like, if you want to pick one group that's gotten the shaft more than any other clinical professional in healthcare, it's the independent community pharmacists. And so now they're the preferred pharmacy, and zero cost. Again, just great. There's a longer version of the story if you want it, but those are kind of the high points. And for a while, this is a single hospital town, and it's owned by the 900-pound gorilla in that part of the country. They're world class in one area of medicine, but they charge like they're world class in everything else. And so we just routed around them. And so people could still go and deal with the super high deductibles and co-pays and all that. We didn't take that away, but we said, look, if you want to go to the best surgeons, the best facilities, and pay zero, you're going to need to drive an hour. Guess what? Most people will do that. And that clinic, Crystal Clinic, got so much business that they actually opened up a clinic later on in Ashtabula. So it starts to address some of this medical desert. As I said, I think I said, less than 30% per capita docs in that area. And so now one of the barriers, again, you'd rather not drive an hour if you don't have to anymore for those things. And actually now that so much business has gone around the price gouging hospital, now they're coming like, oh my gosh, their business model is much more brittle than most people realize. And they've been operating in this mode of their master, we're slave. And we're not saying it needs to flip. It just needs to be a reasonable relationship. So they're like, hey, how can we work with your thing? So, well, they don't have all the imaging modalities in this Crystal Clinic. Hey, how about we do that? And so it's starting to get this relationship back on an appropriate footing. And we shorten Health Rosetta. Somebody actually did this, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. HERO. And because HR is kind of confusing because that's human resources. But our purpose as an organization, we call it the Health Rosetta dividend. We know that we waste more in the US healthcare system than the entire Russian economy. 30 to 50% of all spending is waste. And we've seen that thousands of times now. And so our purpose as an organization is to basically free up those dollars so it can get reinvested into well-being. And what actually drives 80, 90% of health outcomes is not the healthcare system, right? The number one driver of health outcomes in America is income, right? And healthcare has stolen 30 years of wage gains for the working and middle class. Employers are spending more, but it's all gotten eaten up in terms of these crazy premiums and copay and all that. And so that's something that it's up to the particular organization what they want to do. We don't dictate. We were inspired by Rosen Hotels where they've cumulatively saved $540 million. So they're able to fully fund college education for their employees and their employees' kids and the nearby community. That's pretty remarkable. We're hearing lots of other great dividends. So these are a few of them. First of all, just get rid of cost sharing. People that are getting raises, they're actually meaningful because they're not all eaten up. Dependent coverage is getting added back. These are the types of things that are possible when you're not squandering money in the old system. And so these are the books that I've written over the last 7-8 years. We make them available freely to download the PDF version. There's executive summaries of 2 of the books. There's a case study book. So invite you just to go there or just go to Health Rosetta. You'll be able to find it. But if you go /friends, it goes to that page. You're able to download those. And that's been a nice way to get the word out. And my email's up there. I'm happy to have you reach out to me or connect on LinkedIn. And then some next steps that I would suggest, if you're a clinician, work with a Health Rosetta advisor, there's this URL, healthrosetta.org/map, where you can find people in your area. Or we've actually had a lot of clinicians, it wasn't part of our master plan, join the Health Rosetta Advisor Program. It's essentially like a non-clinical fellowship, is one way of thinking about it, because I would argue, I think the data would back me up, that the #1 comorbidity in America is status quo health plans, right? They terrify people of the healthcare system. They're functionally uninsured. Half of Americans don't enter the healthcare system because of costs. That can be removed. So knowing how this works is really important, because that dictates so much in that. So work with a Health Rosetta advisor or become a part of the program. And one of the things we're really big on is, and it's been exciting, like I was talking with Jonathan Bushman and Brandon Ailman about them catalyzing community-owned health plans. And we could have a lot longer conversation about that, but that's something clinicians can do. For benefit advisors, be inspired by somebody like Bryce Heimbaugh. We're not asking anybody to take a vow of poverty to do the right thing. He's doing very well by doing good. We actually, coincidentally, the timing literally opened up our annual cohort yesterday. And so you can go to the URL there and get into the program, and basically all of what we've learned, you can cancel all your Hulu and Netflix and just binge watch Health Rosetta videos for the next year for all the webinars we've had. But there's a lot of stuff. And then for employers, remember I said there was a single employer in that town with 38 employees. That's how, it can start even smaller than that. But you don't have to be big to have a big impact. I mentioned I was in the case study with Jay and Miranda on the People's Electric Cooperative. And, this isn't a massive organization. I think they have about 130 employees. And they're having a big impact not only in their employee base, but I think it's going to ripple beyond that. And, think about the ways, one of the most disorienting things that employers go through when we're taking them through the process, like, what are you going to do with your dividend? They're like, geez, I was just hoping for a less sucky increase. I'm like, no, you actually need to plan. What are you going to do with that? Be thoughtful about it. And again, it's up to the business what they want to do. We also have this thing called a plan grader, because it was weird as we came in. It's like, gosh, one of my silly examples I use, because it's on my desk when I'm doing talks, is like there's this like Bic little mechanical pencil, probably costs like 25 cents or something, and there's 55,000 reviews on Amazon for that stupid little pencil. And 20% of the economy, there's not been an objective mark of value. So it took us a few years to develop this plan grader system, and I encourage every employer to do it, including, you're all employers, right? I'll sometimes needle my physician friends that are complaining about, Blue Cross this or United that. I'm like, what are you offering your employees? And a lot of them are working with those. And so they can walk the talk too. And we have an award that we give out for the best health plans in America, and we have a Walk the Talk award, and it's given to benefit advisor firms, TPA firms, clinical practices. So we have this annual event. Lynn Ann, the great organizer for this event, that's her other event she does, and it's similar mix of people like this, just a little bigger, and so we'll probably have 1,000, 1,200 folks out there. So it's really like what you experience here. It's people who can do, want to get things done. So invite you to do that. So I left a little time for questions. There's mics there. So if you got any questions, the harder the better. Bring it on.
Thank you for what you're doing. I just have a question on the pharmacy aspect. Are you just direct contracting with local pharmacies? And that would probably work great for generics, but are you utilizing a PBM at all for specialty drugs?
Yeah, so generally, I don't think we've done any direct contracting with the pharmacies. We just advantage them and still work through a good PBM. And so if it goes there, they're going to pay zero, and we coordinate, the DPC coordinates with the pharmacy. So fortunately, there are good PBMs that allow that kind of flexibility. So really good question. Yes, Lou.
Dave, thank you so much. So watching the talk yesterday with the woman from McClellan, Texas, and the DPC doc that did things, and having had enough conversations with employers, my sense is that there's learned helplessness on the side of the employers. And the thought that struck me yesterday, and I'm interested in your thoughts, is I wonder if it's worth putting together Zoom discussions where employers are voted or are brought in. We could bring the DPC doc and the woman from McClellan, Texas, and just tell that story. Because what I saw yesterday was that woman from HR with the city, she went from learned hopelessness to starting to get some hope, and then opening it. I guess the deeper question is, how do we get over learned hopelessness?
Yeah, definitely. And we actually have done a lot of webinars with employers, case studies. Of course, that's the heart and soul of Rosetta Fest, is tons of case studies that are basically the rosy winners, these people who are doing these incredible things. But we do webinars, but I think that's a good idea. I think we'd probably step that up a little bit more. And then, but at a local level, I would really encourage you, right? Many of you know the physicians, the root word of doctor is teacher, right? Is educate, educate, educate. We're not saying you need to become salespeople, but as you educate people, and the biggest powerful tool of education is case studies. That's why we created this book of case studies, because when somebody sees kind of birds of a feather, oh, I'm in that state, or I am that size, or I'm in that industry, or I'm a union that's like this, they see somebody like them, they're like, oh, I didn't know that was possible. I was told that was not possible. So we have tons of case studies, and we'll have another, probably 50, 70 coming out of Rosetta Fest. So that's probably the most important thing to do. Another question? Yes. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Has Health Rosetta developed any tools for employers? I'm drawing from the success we've had on the work comp side in developing a culture of safety.
Yep.
And I think a lot of employers are beginning to ask, how do I create a culture of health that can have the same impact that our safety program has had? So your case studies are obviously one aspect of that, but do you have any examples of success stories where they've been able to create a culture of health?
Yes, yeah. I mean, people are doing sometimes indirectly in benefits. They'll do everything from, subsidizing healthy food to, movement exercises to, more like yoga, mindfulness stuff. There's some companies have done this thing, it's called a dream manager. There's a whole book around that where it helps people, what are their dreams, and actually help them contextualize what are their life goals and how can the company help fulfill that. So there's a lot of creative things. I think there's a lot more that can be done, but the starting point for any of it is we free up dollars, and if that's a priority for a company, it makes it easier to pull those things off, right? Because, okay, rather than, funding another penny of EBITDA for some publicly traded company, we can actually restore hope and well-being in our community. And that's really the fuel that fuels us, right? We know this is probably a 20-year problem we're working on. It's really hard. But the day one of these plans goes live, it's life-changing for people. Like, people were terrified of the healthcare system, avoiding care. Now they can do that, let alone going to that next step of those things. So we love that. I think there was another.
Here.
Okay, got another minute or two. Hey, Ray.
Hey. So knowing your background, having started the healthcare unit at Microsoft, being politically connected, you were instrumental in the writing of the CAA. What are your thoughts on what's going on in DC right now? Because the cynic in me says there's a lot of great things going on, but this is a $5 trillion machine. My podcast is Broken Healthcare, but it's working just swell for a lot of the big giant insurance carriers and their minions. What are your thoughts about where we're going from here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the reasons why we're in the employer space is it's the only area of healthcare where you can do permissionless innovation. Like there's a few, there's obviously some rules that we need to follow, but you can virtually do everything. And so that's where we focus in on the local. And personally, I'm engaging locally, like with we have a new mayor. She used to be an Intel engineer, and so we're making the dent there, and there's state opportunities. But at the federal level, whether you love or hate the current occupant of the White House, really at any time, there's always windows of opportunity. And President Trump signed the executive order on hospital pricing transparency. That's opened up that conversation, and so the whole, make America healthy again thing. Okay, right. That's not new news. That was, basically RFK has turbocharged what Michelle Obama was doing. Like, okay, great, we're figuring out. We have ultra-processed food that's killing us. We also have ultra-processed healthcare that's killing us. And so we can solve that. And so I see it as opportunity because the system's broken, right? For me, the large economic system is broken. For me, the biggest aha moment in my professional career was on March 9th, 2016, when I woke up to the news that Bernie and Trump had won the Michigan primary. I was like, whoa, this is not normal. People are frustrated. I view them as kind of two sides of the same coin. And so I think there's an opportunity that's never been there before in our careers for people going, we got to do a reset, right? This is, I used to live in wildfire country. Like, this is a really diseased forest. You need wildfires sometimes. And I think that healthcare has been on this, oh, it's not sustainable. I've heard that for decades. Well, sooner or later that comes home to roost. And I think that's what we're seeing. When you put, the big aha in that day was like, fast forward, the short version is, you have the working middle class in America in a 30-year-long economic depression, because one definition of an economic depression is 2 or more years of wage stagnation or decline. That's way longer than our Great Depression. That's more than twice as long as 1930s Germany. Crazy stuff's going to happen when you push people down. And whether it's right or wrong, people want something different. And I think it's all of our moments to step up. And that's what I'd say is like, yeah, we can be happy or frustrated at any given moment on what's happening in DC, but we can absolutely change things at every level of community. A community is your family, your neighborhood, companies, all that. And that's why I'm going to go local, because you can solve things. And if you look at the history of things that we take for granted now, US mail, police, fire, these all started education. They all started local efforts, and then they got replicated. And that's, to me, the word that we get wrong a lot of times is we want to not scale up, we want to scale out, which to me is replicate. It's not a single, one size fits all for every community. Different communities have different things. So I think there's more opportunity than ever. So I think I'm over on time. One more question? Okay.
So just on a more, structural, technical question around how you're solving for some of these things. If you want to, and I'm going to target very small companies, let's say sub 25 lives on a plan, which generally speaking precludes the ability to obtain a reinsurance contract to then protect on that catastrophic level, either for the business or for the individual. So how are you solving for some of these smaller employers who are trying to eschew these traditional models, but still require that catastrophic level, both for the member and the business?
Yeah, there's a couple states where it's harder. If you're below, like in New York, you need to be over 100, and some other states it's a little lower. But there's always workarounds. So when we started offering our plan as an employer, we had 5 people on our plan. We used a very high deductible plan as sort of our catastrophic plan, and we self-insured. We actually didn't hit claims. We self-insured for any spending under $6,500. That wasn't going to ruin us. There are now a lot of options for small companies that have exploded in our ecosystem. So there's these level-funded programs that, maybe you can't do all the things that Walmart can do as an individual employer. However, the things that a giant employer can do have now been democratized. That's one way of looking at us. We're not literally this, but we're sort of like a purchasing cooperative. So that we are bringing that to companies of all sizes. As long as you have 5. It's harder when you're below. That's where some people are, going to the sharing ministries. And ultimately, our big theory of change is eventually we really localize health and health care. These community-owned health plans are like a rural electric cooperative, and everybody, whether they're an individual freelancer or they're part of it, is shared ownership of that, and we remove that last obstacle. But even small employers are doing incredible things today. So it used to be the case, it was hard, and even when we started Health Rosetta, we couldn't do what we wanted to do that we're able to do now. So there's absolutely ways around almost every obstacle if you're creative, and maybe it's not the ultimate nirvana plan, but it's still far, far better than what's been available before. So I don't want to get us behind because we got a great agenda ahead. So thanks again for your attention coming in. It was amazing. So many of you showed up, and really grateful. All right.